Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to commence our lecture with classical poetry, and from classical poetry I have chosen Geoffrey Chaucer because Geoffrey Chaucer is the icon of the era with which the poetry in English started. And further that, whatever biographical details I'll share with all of you is on the basis of the estimation and guess of the historians. It means that no confirmed or firm record has been found regarding Geoffrey Chaucer. Most of the historians are of the view that this great poet was born in 1342 in London, and how the days of his infancy, childhood and boyhood he spent is still unknown. But historian regarding Chaucer think that he must have attended some of the good or reputed schools, because the build with which the Chaucer has been converted into, the Chaucer has been made into, shows that he had admitted to a very knowledgeable school where reading, religion, French, arithmetic and other natural sciences were to be taught. Such a conjecture, I think, is not without firm ground, because his mature work in the art of poetry led the historians to guess so. Geoffrey Chaucer जो है, I'll explain in Urdu, he was actually ऐसा आदमी था कि वो ऐसा लगता था कि उसको endue किया गया. He has been endowed with such a qualities from the mighty Lord that he showed this promising nature, promising attitude, promising mind even in his early age. और कहा जाता है कि 12 साल की उम्र में वो प्रिंस लायनल्स के पैलेस में पेज बना, यानी मुलाजिम लग गया वहाँ पे उनका. The most coveted position at that time, Prince Lionels is the third son of King Edward III. What was the task of this boy was that he had to attend upon Prince's wife. Again, it is unknown about how much time he had spent at the palace. Next we see that about the age where he lived. Chaucer was born in medieval age, and it is also called the Anglo-Norman period. And Anglo-Norman War Period was the era in which still English was in infancy, and it was Chaucer who took English from the dust and rose it up to the sky. And at that time when our poet was youthful, French and Latin were holding sway on the panorama of Europe, particularly England. And what was the fate of these two languages? There were actually the two classes in Europe, in England, as in London, you may say. The clergy, the priests of Christian hierarchy insisted on the use of Latin language, and that is what we see in Robert Browning's poetry as well. When we see that the poet is dying, he advises his cousin, his nephews, sons, that the epitaph will be written with Latin language. And we see that elite class used French language, and for 3 centuries these two languages became the ruling authority of the literary panorama of England. Very few works appeared in native English at that time, and we see that This period, when Chaucer becomes his maturity, when Chaucer becomes his time of uh, maturity, we see that the era becomes the meeting ground of the two eras. We see that the old traditions were giving way to the new, and Middle Ages thus becomes the um, link between Renaissance. Chaucer's work falls into three periods discussed below. When we see the first period of Chaucer, 1340 to 1373, we find that there was a great influence of French models on the writing of Chaucer. For example, his poem Les Romans de la Rose is carrying the French model. This became the basis of the growth of Chaucer's poetry. He further wrote Book of the Duchess, Complaint unto Pity, and A.B.C. Next comes the second period, a period of somewhat maturity. The poems of the second period show the influence of Italian literature, especially of Dante's Divine Comedy. Whatever he produced in that period, we find that there was a great influence on the writings of Chaucer, of Dante's comedy, Divine Comedy, and he wrote the Parliament of Fowls, Troilus and Cresside, the story of Griselda, and the House of Fame, all carrying the influence of Dante's Divine Comedy and other poems. Third period is very remarkable in the life of not only Chaucer but also the life of London, because it was the period that Chaucer threw everything away that is called French and Latin. He produced on his own, and he shook off every thing that is to be called French or Latin, and he produced with originality, native originality. He wrote the Legend of Good Women. He employed for the first time the heroic couplet, and we can say that he is the creator of the heroic couplet. It was in this period that he wrote the Canterbury Tales, his greatest poetic achievement. Now we discuss a little about prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales is actually the collection of stories which the pilgrims related while going to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. And Canterbury is a place which is still existed in London, in England. Whereas its prologue, if we read prologue to the Canterbury Tales, we find a complete picture of every pilgrim who is going to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. Chaucer included 29 characters, and these characters represent different communities of the society. Chaucer describes every character with excellent mastery on characterization, art of characterization, and remarkable ability of precision. With these 29 characters, he presented a complete picture of England at that time of the Middle Ages. All these characters are individualized, yet thoroughly typical quality gives unique value to Chaucer's picture of men and manners in the England of his time. Dear viewers, you have now learned that Geoffrey Chaucer was the poet who took English from the place of dust and rose it to the sky. That is why Geoffrey Chaucer is called the father of English poetry, because no one else before him or among his contemporaries was using English with so much skill, with so much mastery. So Geoffrey Chaucer is the father of English poetry. Thank you very much. And next we will start with the next lecture. regarding Fairy Queen's writer Edmund Spenser.